We move now into ethical issues in international business, particularly as it relates to agriculture, industry changes, IT, and nano and biotech. So let's start at the top. Examining ethical issues arising from globalization and international business connections and practices. One of the big issues is this rapid change in technology that we're seeing nowadays. Obviously, technology evolves all the time, but it is evolving at a faster and faster rate. Computers that we buy today are going to be obsolete fairly quickly because technology adapts and grows and we learn so much from it over time. But we saw over the course of history, right, new things that happen in technology, and some of these things are very good, enabling us to feed more people or to, um, to deal with, global issues in a really profound way. And then other types of technologies have created problems for us. For example, um, um, the killer seeds that we saw from Monsanto, where farmers were used to cultivating certain parts of their crop as seed for the following year. And what Monsanto did is they created killer seeds, which basically would no longer produce in perpetuity. They would produce the product the first year, but their progeny, the seeds that come from the food that they created that year, would not be able to be planted and grow as plants the following year, creating a reliance on farmers to continually buy new seed rather than allowing them to harvest their own seed and to perpetuate. In history, historically, we've always, farmers have always done this, that there was a percentage of their crops that they used for their own food or to sell to others for money, and then a percentage that was used for them to have seed for the following year. So when a business enters agribusiness and they make these changes, it creates some challenges. So it is important for us to consider the implications of what we do regarding these technologies, and to consider ethics in the decision idea generating process rather than waiting until after the fact and then examining it from an ethical perspective in retrospect. Our goal is to incorporate ethical considerations up front rather than at the end of the decision making process. So, with more globalization, with technology that has truly leveled the playing field so that, we can compete in a global market rather than just a regional market, enables us to really be successful in business, but it can have detrimental impacts on people. So it is important for us to consider how technology and globalization are affected by how ethics, let me try that one more time, how technology and globalization have ethical implications and how we need to consider ethics as we're exploring new technological advances and new globalization possibilities. So let's move down and talk about some of those ethical issues. Well, I've already mentioned in terms of the agricultural stuff, this notion of uh, the killer seeds that Monsanto had put together. But also consider, right, and the Industrial Revolution, how that changed the way things were done. Now we have labor that works for others rather than for themselves. This opened up issues around free trade, and as we have more globalization and more industrial advances, that we found trade would happen within the country and across the ocean with other countries. And the goal of trade, of course, is to be done in a fair way. And if it's done in a way that takes advantage of people, that's going to harm our ability to continue to do trade in the long run. So some people would argue if you're a monopoly or an oligarchy, oligopoly rather, you are able to control the market, and you should be able to control the market. But that's not fair to everybody because that those small handfuls of people raise the costs, they raise the trade prices, they can deceive, they manipulate stocks. And we see this time and time again. It's certainly more and more common nowadays, but it was a big issue during the times of the stock market crash in the 20s, during the Great Depression. Became an issue again in the 1980s and again in the 2000s when we saw um, uh, mortgage, credit default swaps out there. We saw junk bonds out there. People aren't really considering the long-term implications. They're only considering their short-term profitability and how they're going to make money rather than considering what impact these things have on the economy at large, on the ability of people to participate in the economy. This goes back to, trickle down economics. When the poorest people who are creating the labor and doing the work can't participate in the economy, and then you remove social safety nets, we've got a problem in that people aren't able to do the work that they need to do, which is very problematic. So we do need checks and balances. We need labor laws, which is why unionization happened and things like that. Workers were being taken advantage of in sweat houses. We saw people dying because of lack of safety protocols and things of that nature. And we have seen horrible trade agreements that have gone amok for people. And so it is important for us to have free trade or fair trade, even if not free trade, certainly fair trade amongst individuals in order to make sure that everybody can participate in the marketplace. In terms of IT, the biggest issues and threats to our society are the risks that come with engaging in social media, particularly issues of privacy and having our private information shared without our permission. We saw this happen with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Even though Facebook would tell you that you signed an agreement that they could sell your data, it's also important excuse me, it's also important to recognize that nobody reads the legalese privacy agreements and agreements. So is it ethical for us to have people to sign agreements to things in the language that they don't understand? So it is important to summarize the risks and the privacy related issues in language that people understand. And if people had understood that about Facebook, they would have probably been able to get away with what they did in a better way, in a safer manner. But the challenge, of course, is in terms of privacy. Um, we don't want our data shared without our permission, because once our data is out there, we have the risk of having our identity stolen, our social security numbers stolen, somebody spoofing who we are, spreading information, having an impact on our credit rating, having an impact on our reputation alone. And so we need really good cybersecurity to make sure that we are protecting those things. Property rights are a big issue as well. When we talk to you all as students about cheating and cheating in the classroom, you're violating property rights when you are cheating, because you are taking ownership of somebody else's work that you did not create. It's fine to use it if you acknowledge who the source was, but when you use information and pretend that it's yours, this is problematic. And so we have more and more systems in place trying to help us to capture cheating when it occurs, when you download somebody else's paper and put your name on it, and those sorts of things. Nanotech and biotech. Nanotech and biotech have changed lives. There's no doubt about it. But it's also important for us to consider what happens if nanotech and biotech are out of control and it creates dangerous products or risky products. And so nanotech works at a level of micro level, such a micro level that it's hard for us to understand and predict how it's going to behave. Nanotech is a relatively new technology, and while we've been using it for a while, it hasn't been for a long period of time. We've probably been using it maybe, I don't know, 20 odd years or so, where it's become a major issue. And the most important thing with respect to nanotech and biotech is that we need to fully research and understand products and how they're going to behave before we put them out there to the public. Secondarily, we need to consider the ethical implications of nanotech and biotech as we are engaged in the scientific process and the investigative process and the development process, not wait till after the fact to try to fix the problems. So let's talk a little bit about globalization now that we've covered the technology side of things. Globalization is largely driven by multinational corporations, which basically means they have locations in multiple countries. Even if the company was founded here in the United States, they might have branches in a country in South America and a country in the continent of Africa or Europe or the Middle East or the Far East. And they largely drive the globalization and trade market. So we have people who go to work in other foreign countries. We hire local people. We hire foreign nationals to go and do this work. And so navigating the human rights and human resources policies and procedures is an important part of treating people ethically and fairly. So that drives a lot of what we're doing here. There are some benefits to multinational and globalization because it does create jobs and skills and income for people who were in developing nations that don't have a lot of money or a lot of financial opportunities, particularly where we see people who might be marginalized by class systems. Even if they're not formal class systems, there's informal class systems out there. It does decrease poverty and things like that, but it does create inequality and it creates challenges here at home. When we spread American values across the board, there's a loss of some culture. People become more attuned to Western ways of doing things as opposed to how they have done things traditionally in their country. So there is a loss of cultural value. And as we leave the United States and we try to do our business abroad, it's sort of the race to the bottom. How cheap can we pay for our labor? How cheap can we design our products with very minimal checks and balances to make sure product quality is out there? Now, if a company cares about product quality, then it sort of doesn't matter where they do it. But when they go abroad and into a multinational situation because they're trying to avoid constraints here in the U.S. market, that becomes more problematic. For example, Philip Morris cigarettes have less constraints abroad, and so they sell cigarettes and advertise cigarettes, outside of the United States with no questions asked. Whereas here in the United States, we recognize it as a health risk, and there's more constraints on them. So they will move multinationally because they're trying to avoid, those issues. And then, of course, the introduction of inappropriate technologies into developing countries. Can you imagine in a developing country having to deal with the Monsanto seed issue? These are farmers who are poor, who are they have to sustain for themselves to be able to survive and thrive, and to have to buy seeds every year is an extra expense that they never had to deal with before when they were using food seeds here in the United States. So we can develop hardy seeds that don't die after the first year of planting. So there are many things we need to consider ethically when we're advancing into international business. We need to recognize that different governments and different laws have different practices that they have to engage in, that every country has different levels of development in their developing countries, and that there are very different cultural understandings about what it means to have intellectual property, for example. In Asian countries, for example, in China and in Indonesia, they don't see intellectual property as something that an individual owns. It is owned by the collective. It is owned by the community. Everybody has the right to it. And so that creates problems for people who are trying to do business here in the United States, where we value individual rights and we value individual intellectual freedoms and intellectual property. It's not that there's a right or wrong way, only that the cultural norms in one location are different than the cultural norms in a different location. This kind of suggests an issue of ethical relativism, that there's no true ethical absolute, and everything is relative based on culture. And to some extent, I agree with this, but not in all circumstances. I do believe that there are some sort of absolute rights. But let's talk a little bit about the ethical relativism issues and some of the criticism of it. So some of the criticisms include that there are different moral standards in all societies, and that and some are consistent across the board and some are not. Intellectual property is one of them. Just because there are moral differences, however, doesn't mean that it's about relativism, which means that there's no one right way to be, so why bother, right? And that's not what we're saying. We can argue that based on our country and based on the way we do things, you need to adhere to our rules. Stuff that comes out of your country, that stays within your country, you can decide your own rules. But if you want to do business with us, we have a certain standard that we expect. And we find this as a challenge in reverse. For example, in other countries, excuse me, excuse me, in other countries, it is okay to use bribes to get business contracts. But for us, that's against our laws. Our hands are tied when we're trying to get and secure contracts with other businesses abroad. And we'll talk more about this in a bit. But the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act tells us we are not excuse me, we are not allowed to use bribes to engage with people to get contracts in the way that we want to. Relativism does have some incoherent consequences in that we really are not sure of the long-term implications of having it doesn't matter, who cares, we'll just throw up our hands and say we can't fix this. And if we allow relativism to occur, then we will end up with a lot more chaos than we would want. So I do think it's so important for us to recognize that there are some consistencies across the board that we all have to adhere to, and that if we want to do business at a global level, we need to adhere with the way business is done in that country. If we don't want to, then we shouldn't. If that violates our ethical norms, then we don't do business there. I mean, it's as simple as that. Does that cut off our arm to be able to make more profit? Sure. But it is important for us to recognize that, that there are definitely differences, and there are definitely standards that we need to adhere to for ourselves. There are societal standards that are not above criticism. Every societal standard has the obligation to be critically analyzed and evaluated on a regular basis. So it is important that we recognize when society is engaging in behaviors that are not okay. If you go back to some of the literature that you read when you were kids, in high school or in grammar school, and the lottery is one example of that. In the lottery, Shirley Jackson's book, The Lottery, the social standard was once a year they would gather rocks, they would choose somebody by lottery, and they would kill them. And it had some societal implications, which I specifically forget right now what it was. But I remember the story addressing how it was okay, and society accepted this. Although if you were the person being stoned to death, you were uncomfortable with that became a problem. So you might say, well, that's okay in their country as long as they don't impose it elsewhere. But are there some societal standards that are not above criticism? Another example might be looking at female genital mutilation. While this is an accepted practice in many African countries or Arab speaking countries, based on old standards of what is considered to be pure, it is mutilation. It creates a problem for women to enjoy sexual pleasure and to be able to sometimes procreate appropriately. It can create permanent damage to someone's ability to reproduce. And so, when is it okay for us to say this is a societal standard that's not okay anymore and that you're not allowed to do this? This is a huge issue in Nigeria and many other countries in North and Central Africa. One way to get around some of these notions of ethical relativism is this idea of integrated social contracts theory. And it argues two things. One, that there are hypernorms or meta norms that should apply to all people in all societies, that female genital mutilation is inappropriate, and killing people is wrong, etc. And those hypernorms should apply to everybody regardless of the cultures. And then there are what we call microsocial norms, applying only in specific societies, and they're going to be different from society to society. So clothing norms and things like that. So do I have a good hard and fast answer about what should be the hypernorm and what should be the microsocial norm? No. I mean, I can have a broad idea of what they should be in terms of making sure that we are treating everybody fairly and kindly and without harming them. But it is important that we recognize that there are some norms, even if I don't like it, if it doesn't have a negative impact on me, I'm okay with letting another country do what it is they need to do, or a harm on anybody in general. For example, around the female genital mutilation, that wouldn't fall under microsocial norms. That would fall under a hyper norm for me personally. So that's different from everybody.